Yes, what really happened is there were, at the beginning, there was a good definition between the urban town and the countryside, right? But what happened was the surrounding areas that were dedicated to the cultivation of tobacco. There was a demand for the leaf, raw material, to those American companies that were located in strategically zones for tobacco cultivation. They were demanding the leaves, right? But with a process that started first with the cultivation of tobacco, they were moving workshop. The first workshop started in the family house. People, women, everybody participated in that. And then they were bigger, and they were start building a bigger workshop in the town and start to expand, right? But was production. Those who started with the manufacture were locals, and the production was for the national market, of tobaccos and cigars. Yes.
So there was never an industrialization period in Cuba, because we're only talking about domestic demand, and yes, but there was never a big exploit of it.
Well, what's happening is in Cuba, that's what I'm talking about, economic cycles. We have in Cuba first not only cattle raising and agricultural production. Tobacco was an important part, of course, in the 17th century in some areas of the western part of Cuba, but sugar was a determinant. Sugar at the beginning, sugar in the 19th century, the colonial time, sugar owners were locals, Spaniards, and they were the way that they used to increase production was expansion, land expansion, right? Land expansion, because they was moving to the cultivation to a different area. So my point here is that we have slavery, because we don't have a lot of people working freely on those. We have a massive influence in slavery, and with the slavery, there is another topic. We have the century revolution, right? The replication of that for those sugar plantations. So what we meant in Cuba was, yes, this fear of slavery. That's why I'm mentioning all the time free population working in that town, because of slavery. The slaves were the one who related to the sugar, yes, sugar production. In the late 19th century, let's say, the industrialization of Cuban sugar production, with of course, the conglomeration, the concentration of the industry in big units, as was the case of Central Azucarero. They were not all ingenious, right? Central Azucarero and the railroads. And that process that started in the western part of the island, as I mentioned it to you, was completely, has a different dynamic and different phase in the period, in the 20th century, because after North American intervention in Cuba, those lands that were not reserved for sugar production in the eastern part of Cuba, which was the case of Camagüey and Oriente, they were the one who really have the big sugar companies. That was the case of United Sugar Company, United Fruit Company, and so on. So they have that kind of, yes, industrialization is a topic that we need to serve of this discussion, because the sugar industry was mostly owned by the United States companies. So that's why. And then what came the revolution and different.
And even if it's outside the topic, only if you want to answer. Now, what happened to all that?
Well, the sugar industry, the sugar production is insignificant right now in Cuba. They closed a lot of centrales azucareros. I think it was in the 90s, since the late 90s, and there's not part of that. It has not the same impact. Cuba, the history of Cuba is the history of monoculture, and sugar means that. So any other questions?
Was there any change in the origins of the immigrants? Galicians, other immigrants from Spain?
Well, most of the records show that most of the immigrants there were from Canary Islands. So what is important is there was other areas in the eastern part of Cuba, as was the case of Holguín, that have Canary Islands immigrants working on sugar plantation. And then they came to the contracts. That was the case of Las Villas. But in Las Villas, if we look at the number of the census, the data shows that there was an agricultural province, and they were renegated in the sugar production. So most of those who came to Las Villas work on different activities. And in Báez in particular were immigrants from the Canary Islands. No, they were also from Galicia and other areas on Spain were minimal. The gross immigration was from the Canary Islands. And they have the cultivation of tobacco. I think the first data of immigration there was when the Spanish administration request, I think was in the late 16th century, colonization with families from the Canary Islands. There were several demands for that throughout the colonial period, but mostly with transatlantic migration of the late 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, those who came from Spain, which were in massive numbers, they have a very well distinguished profile. And those who, the Catalans and the Galicians, but mostly in that part of Cuba, those from the Canary Islands. Any other questions? I just want to mention one thing, that this was very important to me because you are, as a student, you probably have a lot of papers to do, doing research and so on. So it's important to look at different sources. For this, it was very difficult because I cannot find one place to look at. There was not the National Archive of Cuba. I have to look at different sources, different places, different local archives. Sometimes very difficult. Sometimes they were not, the documents were not in the best condition, but also oral history. So for you as a student, look at sources that you have available. And oral history is very, very, very good, right? If you look at that with the critical analysis and with knowledge. So oral history was very attractive to me and was an important part also of this work.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How did you use oral history to reconstruct the history of the...
Well, because the last part, I came to this topic first because I have a wonderful professor at Columbia University. Her name is Professor Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui. She is from Bolivia. And she told me about the importance of the subaltern studies, right? And the importance of those who has no voice, the vision of the other that were not part of the official history, the big history. So that was fascinating for me. And also because I have to convince my advisor of this topic, and I say, okay, I know this town, because part of my family is from that town, so I say, okay, I know this town, and I remember since I was a child that they were talking about tobacco, and I think, okay, that's part of the nostalgia, right? But also, let's look at that, because there are material evidence that something was happening here regarding tobacco, and those mansions were for real. So, and those people talking were for real. So what happened was that I have there are colonial census, Republican census, materials in general regarding transactions. You will see that the Spanish administration in the New World was very good keeping records of everything, right? They were keeping records of everything. So for the colonial period was fine, but what's happening in the 20th century? I have to look at data from the tobacco industry. I have to look data from migrations, and they were not clear, and that's an important topic. But I moved to the town. I tried to reach, okay, there is any paper here. So I found this local newspaper, and the local newspaper was a point of departure to try to look at people, right? Who were those people? And for me, there was, well, I think I was lucky that I could find a couple of survivors. And they showed me the ownership of brands. And also, this is a difficult topic to reach because we could not have access to those property papers before 1959. So most of them were at the private houses, right? At private houses, because I don't have access to that mercantile property records and so on. So because of nationalization of all of these aspects that you know. So what's happening is I have these people. So I conduct surveys. I have questionnaires for them, and I request materials. Some of them gave it to me. Some of them were questioning. Some of them were not happy what I did. Some of them were happy. Some of them said, okay, you probably talk more about the finca Madrazo, because Madrazo was the big guy. For these people, that's the Patria Chica, right? They have, yes, they know that they're part of Cuba, but they were more identified with their own land. So that's why I found that very attractive. question? Thank you so much, guys. I wish you the best.